Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
Our chalice lighting words today come from Eric Walker Wilkstrom. They're entitled Why We're Here. Here today in this place with these people, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way. I am pleased to have Matt Kelly here today. Matt's an attorney with family ties to Western North Dakota. And I guess in 2017, the company that built the Dakota Access Pipeline sued some people, individuals, and organizations. And Matt's been involved with that case for quite a while, and it's touched my life a little bit and some other people in our community as well. So I thought it'd be really great to hear more about that.
Like Mary said, I'm here to talk about my work that I've done on behalf of Greenpeace. I want to talk a little bit about myself, and I want to talk about something called SLAP lawsuits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, which is something that's come up in my practice. I got out of law school, I had a federal clerkship, which I want to talk about in a little bit because it's in the context of what I do for work, why it's important to me. But I went and worked for a big law firm. I represented oil companies, so don't boo. But I learned a lot, and I learned about how this stuff works, and it kind of all loops back together because I got to see how that system works and how really it's just big business and big money and ways to make money for big business. I represent Greenpeace in this lawsuit brought by Energy Transfer Partners against Greenpeace related to the Dakota Access protests. I represent an entity of Greenpeace called Greenpeace Fund. Greenpeace has 3 entities that are involved in the lawsuit: Greenpeace Fund, Greenpeace International, Greenpeace Incorporated. And that's kind of important, but not especially. It's important because I represent Greenpeace Fund, which is a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit. I'm sure people have heard of what that is. Greenpeace Incorporated is a 501c4. It's an entity that does work on behalf, it performs the mission and does the work. And Greenpeace International is the international organization that doesn't control, but does work with all of the national level Greenpeace organizations, of which there are many all over the world. Has anyone here ever talked to anyone from Greenpeace? It's important because folks in this congregation were involved in the protests at Standing Rock. And I'll tell you, I've talked to hundreds of people who were at Standing Rock, and I've talked to maybe 2 of those people who know anything about Greenpeace. But this lawsuit has been filed in 2017. Energy Transfer filed a lawsuit in federal court in Bismarck to start about the protests, claiming that Greenpeace funded, planned, and promoted violent protests at Standing Rock. What they wanted was $900 million. They filed something called a RICO lawsuit. So it's RICO. Nobody knew what RICO was, but Donald Trump was charged with RICO charges, so we've now learned that in the country. It's the statute that's used to bring down the mob. It says that when people engage in conspiracies and engage in criminal acts, they should be punished, and every person that engaged in the conspiracy should be punished. So they filed this lawsuit, and it went to the federal district court here, and it went to a judge named Billy Roy Wilson, who isn't a North Dakota judge. He's a guy out of Arkansas. And so this is how I tell you how I got involved in the case. Because when I was practicing over here in 2015, I tried a case in front of Billy Roy Wilson because North Dakota was overwhelmed at that time. And you may recall, because of the oil boom, there was too much litigation going on for the judges to keep up. And so they brought in this judge from Arkansas named Billy Roy Wilson. I ended up trying a case in front of him. I'll admit I lost. It was a jury trial, but it was a wonderful experience because the judge he was a kook. And I say kook in a good way. He was from Arkansas and he looked like it, and he dressed maybe he raised mules for a living, which I learned he did do. We were doing voir dire at the beginning of the trial, and the judge, and a phone goes off. And in federal court, that's a big deal. Like maybe somebody's going to jail. And it rings for a minute, and the judge reaches down, he pulls out his own phone, turns it off, and then he turns to the jury and says, "I hold myself in contempt," which is my favorite courtroom moment to date. But the reason I tell you about that is that this case was assigned to Billy Roy Wilson. So Greenpeace had to go find lawyers, and they didn't know anyone in North Dakota because they had done very little here. And so they ended up calling me because I was the only lawyer around who had two criteria, which one is I was willing to represent Greenpeace, which is a small pool, and two, in North Dakota, and two, that I had been in front of Billy Roy Wilson. And it's a fun story to this point because we went to Billy Roy Wilson, we filed motions, and we said, this is a violation of the free speech rights of Greenpeace. This case doesn't have any merit because all Greenpeace has done is exercise their right of free speech. And the judge agreed with us. He said, that's right, there's nothing here. So he threw out the RICO claim. However, the lawsuit was 100 pages long, and RICO was just a little bit of that. And so the judge said, I don't have jurisdiction to rule on the remaining claims in the case. And so he sent that case, well, he just dismissed it. But what he left open was the ability for Energy Transfer to refile the case in state court, which they did almost immediately in Morton County. So that's the South Central Judicial District. They filed a case that has 8 causes of action. I'll go through those and tell you about them. And they filed it against Greenpeace, Fund, my client, Greenpeace International, Greenpeace Incorporated, and an amorphous entity called Red Warrior Society, which can't be served, and a few other people. But as the case stands today, it's only against the Greenpeace entities. So here I have to tell you, as a lawyer, I'm governed by the rules of professional responsibility. Everybody likes to tell jokes about lawyers that we don't have any morals, but we do have a list of rules that we have to follow. And rule 3.6 of those says I'm not allowed to talk about trials because I might taint the jury pool. But there's an exception. And the exception to that is I'm allowed to talk about cases if I talk about them in a factual manner and if I'm making a request for information. There's some other ones too, but they don't really apply here. And so let me tell you about my request for information, which is really part of the reason that I'm here. I want to talk about these important topics. I want to tell you about the case. But I also want to tell you what I need. And that's the hard part, because there's been millions of dollars spent on this case, probably tens of millions of dollars on both sides of this case. There's probably about 2 million pages of documents that have been produced in the case. To date, we've taken maybe 20 depositions, and we're going to take 50 more in the next 60 days. I don't think this story is getting out. I don't think the real story of what happened at Standing Rock and with the protests is being presented. And I want to tell that story. And one way that I can tell that story is to get people who were at Standing Rock, who participated in the protests, to tell their story, to present that to a jury in North Dakota so that they can know what actually happened. That's hard. And it's hard because of the other reason I'm here to talk to you today, which is how expensive litigation is, how it can be used against people, how it can be used to ruin your life even if you win the case. That's the strategic lawsuits against public participation. So maybe after this, if anybody is interested, I'd love to talk to you about your experiences with Standing Rock, your experiences with the protests, people you know who might be able to tell stories about the protests. Like I just heard Tim talk about a food tent. That's the type of conduct that this lawsuit intends to make Greenpeace pay damages for, huge damages, is things like feeding protesters, things like expressing yourself. This book that we listened to earlier was really good. The little girl standing in front of the bulldozer with a sign would be subject to hundreds of millions of dollars of liability in the lawsuit that I'm defending. So let me talk about the lawsuit. I'm allowed to talk about it factually, which I'm glad to do. It's been moved. It's in state court in Mandan. We have a trial set for July of this summer, the last week of July and all of August, 5 weeks of trial. It'll be a jury trial. I've tried to get the trial moved out of Mandan because of the biases of the people that live here against the protests. I've been unsuccessful. The case has 8 causes of action against Greenpeace, and they're all related to things that happened at the protests generally, with the exception of statements that Greenpeace made. So let me start with the causes of action that have to do with what happened at the protests. Energy Transfer makes assertions that Greenpeace funded, promoted, encouraged violence at the protests. And those come out into causes of action called trespass. So they say that Greenpeace caused protesters to go onto land owned by Energy Transfer. They say that the complaint claims that nuisance, so people caused a nuisance, they interrupted the construction of the pipeline. Conversion, that protesters destroyed equipment that was owned by the company. All of these kind of have a backstop of something called aiding and abetting. So also saying that Greenpeace helped those things happen. A vast conspiracy is alleged. And then there's a claim for something called tortious interference with business relationships. And this is an interesting one. Energy Transfer claims that Greenpeace knew about the banking relationships that Energy Transfer had for the loans for the pipeline. And they went to the banks and somehow committed a tort, the tort being defamation. They lied about the true circumstances of what was happening at Standing Rock, and the banks pulled their funding. They want about $114 million for this. The lies that they say, and they're characterized as lies, so I can say that Greenpeace made, originally were in the dozens. As the case has progressed, Energy Transfer has whittled that down. They said, well, maybe we weren't serious about that. Maybe we're not serious about that. One of those, the ones that have gone away relate to climate change. Greenpeace said, well, the pipeline will cause climate change. Energy Transfer disputes that and says that's a lie that Greenpeace should pay for. Greenpeace made statements saying that the pipeline is a risk to the water supply. Energy Transfer said that's a lie. And Greenpeace and the other plaintiffs or defendants should be required to pay huge sums of money for making those lies. The ones that remain, that I do have to defend again. Energy Transfer asserts that Greenpeace made statements that the pipeline crosses tribal lands and say that's a lie. Energy Transfer alleges that Greenpeace made statements that Energy Transfer and the police committed violent acts against peaceful protesters, and that's a lie. And the final category is that Energy Transfer claims that Greenpeace wrongfully said that the construction of the pipeline desecrated cultural artifacts. So that's the case that I have to defend. The statements that, to prove that those were not false statements. And so that's what I need help with. And I'd love to talk to anyone I can about testimony they could give along those lines. The other story that I need to tell is that many organizations were involved. And I need to be compelling, and I need to show the jurors that it's not wrongful to feed people. It's not wrongful to keep people warm. It's not wrongful to give them sleeping bags. Those things aren't illegal. Those things don't mean your organization should go away. In fact, those are part of being a member of a community, of being a participant in democracy. Those are the stories that I want to tell. So that's and I'm glad to talk to anybody about the Greenpeace case. It's monstrously expensive. It's terribly burdensome. It will be an awful burden on the people of this town of Mandan when the trial happens. The members of the jury will have to be away from their jobs for 5 weeks. Yeah, they get paid a minor stipend. The amount of people that will be called to testify will be enormous. The number of lawyers that will be in town will be in the dozens. The judge won't be able to do other useful work during that time period. It's a big deal. So let me switch to the next topic, the thing that I came to talk about as well, which is strategic lawsuits against public participation. So like I said, I was a lawyer for oil companies. I've been a lawyer for big construction companies. For a lot of years, I kind of did whatever came through the door because I had a mortgage and kids. So that's what you do. And so I've had a broad experience and I've seen a lot of things. What I've seen recently in my experience is that corporations have weaponized the legal system. And they weaponize it in a way so that they can make sure that people don't express themselves, so that organizations and individuals are scared to exert their free speech rights, to petition their government, to say when things are wrong. And let me give some examples of that. North Dakota doesn't have an anti-SLAPP law, so that's what I'm going to talk about at the end, is some sort of law that could prevent these types of lawsuits from happening. So I can't say that the Greenpeace litigation is a strategic lawsuit against public participation because there's no such thing in North Dakota. But let's talk about what that could be. And there's an example. And you guys probably know the person who was affected by this, but I won't say his name, but there was a blogger in Bismarck who made a blog post about a prominent businessman in Dickinson. And this was it's been quite a while, 2015 or 2016. And in the blog post, he made an assertion and told a story about how this prominent person was able to get a politician on the phone. And at the conclusion of the call, he told the people on the call, that's what $20,000 will get you. He was telling a story about, a pretty legitimate public interest. That prominent businessman sued him. So he had to go hire a lawyer, this blogger did. And the case was ultimately dismissed. And it was thrown out on something called statute of limitations, which means this businessman waited too long to bring the claim, and so it had to go away. It took 3 years. In the meantime, this blogger had to hire a lawyer, had to engage in litigation, had to live under the scepter that he was going to lose his money, livelihood, things like that. That's what these lawsuits do. They take someone with a lot of power and a lot of money, and they allow them to abuse the judicial process in order to prevent people from speaking out. And our country has been based on this fantastic idea all along that everyone is equal under the eyes of the law, that everyone has a voice, that we have a constitutional right to petition our government for wrongs. We're allowed to say, you're doing a great job or you're a bum. That's our right. And because of the way our politics and our system has grown, corporations are often aligned with political interests. So when you say, I don't agree with the Dakota Access Pipeline, you're petitioning your government on a legitimate thing that you disagree with, that the Dakota Access Pipeline shouldn't cross under Lake Oahe and the Army Corps of Engineers shouldn't provide an easement. That would be acceptable free speech. The issue is that the government is aligned with the business. And so the government has a position. And so when you speak to the government about the business and the act that you like or don't like, now you're speaking out against a corporation. And that corporation can use the power of the courts and their massive, their money, that's what it is, to file lawsuits. And they don't. And so when I talk about lawsuits that have been weaponized, we're talking about lawsuits that it doesn't matter the result. Because for most people, having to spend $50,000 in a year on a lawyer is it. You're not going to recover from that. And if you get hit with $100,000 or $150,000 judgment because of something you said, that's it for you. But the expense of the lawyer is really the problem. So if a company comes after you and says you should pay $3 million because this little girl stood in front of a bulldozer and we weren't able to build that day, and that cost us a whole bunch of problems because we didn't get our pipeline online in time, and then we couldn't sell oil for Exxon, and then Exxon had to hire some trains, then money gets huge. And pretty soon it becomes so huge that it doesn't matter anymore for the defendant. You've quashed their free speech. You've taken that away from them. All right, I think my notes are going to come back up. So I want to talk specifically about these strategic lawsuits because I found some really good things about it. So here would be the purposes of a strategic lawsuit against public participation. The intent to retaliate for successful opposition on an issue of public interest. So a company who's had a permit pulled, or say a property developer who the city has denied the right to build something, will come after you. Will come after the people who oppose it, even though they were successful in their opposition. This is similar to the Dakota Access Pipeline, where the protesters were successful in getting the Obama administration to declare that an environmental impact statement was necessary. 2, the attempt to prevent expected future competent opposition on subsequent policy issues. I was at the environmental impact statement hearings on the Dakota Access Pipeline a couple of weeks ago. The world's blurring together. There weren't that many people there. There certainly weren't tens of thousands of protesters like there were at Standing Rock. A reason for that could be that Energy Transfer has been serving lawsuits. They've been serving subpoenas. People are scared to voice their opposition. 3, the intent to intimidate and generally to send a message that opposition will be punished. Same thing. That they take away your ability to exercise your free speech rights because the hassle of doing it isn't worth it. And 4, a view of litigation and the use of the court system is simply another tool in a strategy to win a political or economic battle. That's the real problem, is that we've taken public comment out of the place where it truly should exist, which is in the public forum, where we would go and talk to our elected leaders. We would provide public comment. We write letters to the editor, those types of things. Now we've turned it into a judicial issue. And we've turned it into something where you could be called to defend yourself in court using lawyers and depositions and juries with the fear of being financially ruined over your head. And when I tell it like this, I think, well, maybe I shouldn't be speaking out either, because it's scary. Well, let's talk about what could be done and why this is important. What could be done is that some states have adopted what's called anti-SLAPP litigation. And so what they've done is they've gone to the legislature and they've said these types of lawsuits can be problematic, and they craft a remedy so that good lawsuits can get through and bad lawsuits get thrown out. And California has an anti-SLAPP lawsuit. I bring that up because Greenpeace was sued in an almost identical case by a company called Resolute, which is a timber company in Canada. And they made these same RICO claims that were made against Greenpeace here in North Dakota, and the court threw them out in an expedited manner. The court looked at them and said, no, these claims are specious, and no, you're not going to do that here. And in fact, Resolute, you're going to have to pay the attorney's fees of Greenpeace and take away the leverage. There's model statutes, and in fact, I think in North Dakota, people have talked about bringing anti-SLAPP litigation. And I think it's a good idea. And I think if this issue comes up in your community, there's no better place where you should go and exercise your right of free speech to go support that type of thing. Let me go back to Greenpeace real quick. I apologize that my notes didn't come up because now I feel like I missed some of the fun parts of the story. Because a lot of people don't know about Greenpeace. And I didn't really know about Greenpeace either. Greenpeace is founded on the Quaker ideal of bearing witness, which I think is really powerful. And not only bearing witness, but then acting according to your conscience. Greenpeace initially was a group of activists who opposed nuclear weapons testing in Alaska. And they boarded an old boat and they headed north to put themselves in the way of the testing and to prevent it. And it's kind of a funny twist. They were unsuccessful. It's probably not funny to them, but they were unable to stop the testing. But they raised enough awareness about it that it made a difference. And they realized that this idea of bearing witness and then acting according to your conscience can be very powerful. And so I've had an opportunity now to spend 6 years working with the people at Greenpeace. And I've met, at least a dozen Greenpeace people and gotten to know them very well. And they're people of good conscience. And they're people who truly believe in the ideals and the things that they're working on. And it's crazy to me that this is the lawsuit that they're in. Because they haven't done any of the things, I can't see the evidence of them doing the things that they've been accused of. because they're only living up to their ideals. And they're living up to their ideals in a way that is very similar to the members of this congregation did, which is to come out here, to amplify others' voices, to bear witness to a big problem, and to seek a solution according to our conscience. And they continue to do that today, but they have to do it today with teams of lawyers. I have to get all their executives regularly on calls, talk to them about what's going on, and they've been distracted. And it's not good. It's not a good use of our legal system. It's not a good use of our democracy. And I guess it's wasteful. And most importantly, it detracts us from the actual issues, the actual things that we should be talking about. I shouldn't be here talking about litigation in Mandan. I should be here talking about the easement across Lake Oahe that's currently under review by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the issues related to that easement and the environmental impacts, not just on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation, but on the waterway that we all depend on. And we should be having a conversation about the effects of this unfettered oil and gas development. And not to say that we should stop it, but we should have a conversation about what it means for the future of our planet. From that alone, these lawsuits are effective because they are preventing us from having that conversation, and they're making us talk about something else. And so eventually it's a conversation about the resiliency of our democracy and our ability to continue moving forward in a way that recognizes the individual rights of people and their free expression.
Well, we can now extinguish our chalice, and I'd like to share some words that come from Jim McGraw. Go in peace, seeking justice. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in mindless oblivion. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go without challenging yourself or others. When I say go in peace, I don't mean go in utter ease and comfort. When I say go in peace, I mean go in peace seeking justice. I mean go in peace, committed to equal rights and opportunities for all. When I say go in peace, I mean go in the peace that is created when together we build communities of true solidarity, deep compassion, and fierce, unrelenting love. Go in peace.
The world to know we won't let hatred grow. Put a little love in your heart. I hope when you decide